hope you can hear me over the sound of all the exhaust pipes. Anyway, this time we're in Cuba. We're gonna do something a little bit different. Instead of just bringing you along with our day-to-day adventures in Cuba, we're going to give you a video of tips and tricks and do's and don'ts and some things that are good to know. The first thing I like to tell you is that it's incredibly safe and the food is actually good if you're not on your resort, okay? So let's get that out of the way. We'll get into that a little bit more later. So watch through to the end. We'll show you everything. We'll show you the resorts. We'll show you Havana, which is where we are right now. And speaking of which, I'm starving. Let's go get breakfast.
For nearly 60 years, this tiny island has been standing in front of the US and they're still their own country, sacrificing some modern conveniences and at times even giving up basic necessities in exchange for their pride and dignity. Recently, the US has made it so that no banks in the world are allowed to accept US dollars that come from Cuba, making all the US money they've collected from tourism over the years effectively useless. It's cruel and unnecessary, and it tells a much bigger story that's far outside my ability and the scope of this video, but it's worth your investigation no less. Cuba is small, but any amount of research will show you just how profound of an impact they've had throughout history. And the fact that they're still doing their own thing despite the endless punishment is impressive to say the least.
Hey. Okay, so a couple things that are interesting to know is Havana, Old Havana, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so that's one. And two, Havana is one of the new wonders of the world. So that's two teams of professional historian people that are way smarter than you and I telling us that Havana is a special place to go to. And it's super true. Every single alleyway that you go down is mind-blowing. Just so full of character. It's not polished or manicured by any stretch of the imagination, but that's it's beautiful. It's what makes it beautiful.
Everything here bears the evidence of passionate people. The food, the buildings, the smiles, the art, the cars, and especially the music. Cuba is one of the safest countries I've ever been to. There's no organized crime, no drugs, no gangs, no violent crimes, and not even much petty theft to report of. Havana then becomes a sandbox to play in and explore. Every directional whim rewards you with a site that is usually reserved only for James Bond movies. Here, it feels like everyone is just hanging out. They assume the same body position and state of mind that might occupy your couch at home, but instead, on the front steps of their street-facing apartments. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, we're just on our way to go look for breakfast in Havana, which brings me to another tip about Cuba. If somebody complains to you about the food in Cuba, what you should do is immediately slap them in the face and tell them to leave the resort and go to Havana. We've had some world-class meals here. Actually, everything we've eaten in Havana has been incredible. But you do have to talk to the locals and ask where to eat, and they'll tell you where the restaurants are that aren't on government rations. So they're privately owned restaurants, and they have the good stuff, and it is good.
It's a dangerous thing to grab a small, delicious cup of coffee and have a seat on the small wooden chairs that wobble on the cobblestone, and an even riskier move to enjoy a Cuban cigar while you take in the music that colors the air. In a moment like that, your mind could easily be poisoned against the West and its hustle culture. You might start to see things a little differently. You might wonder what purpose you serve while you sit in rush hour traffic back home, and I can tell you from experience, it's pretty damn hard to put that bird back in the cage.
This is the literal tank that Fidel Castro used to shoot down the U.S. vessel Houston during the mercenary invasion of the Bay of Pigs in April 1961. So that's what he used. That's crazy. we're in this little, I don't know what you call it. It's a passageway in between two main roads. It's called Paseo del Prado. And basically it's just like an activity center for, seems like anything that anybody wants to do. There's art here, there's people rollerblading and skateboarding. And last night there was music. There's a group of kids all going to school. And it's just like a lovely little community space for whatever anybody wants to do. Last night the music was insane here. And that's another thing about Cuba is actually even the smallest little street bands could play circles around pretty much anybody I've ever heard play music. Like the musicianship here is just on a whole other stratosphere to what we're used to in North America. It's incredible.
At this point in your trip, the more inquisitive minds amongst your group might begin to question everything. They might start mumbling about what all their toiling has really gotten them back home. They might even begin to start questioning their 9 to 5. Quick, grab your phone and put a few Nike and Lululemon commercials in their brain. Find a Coca-Cola and put it in their hand. Remind them what a Big Mac might taste like. And by all means, don't let them see all the people around them living the same amount of hours in a day, but having more time to spend.
There's one thing that you will undoubtedly have to figure out if you come to Cuba, and that is the money situation. And I'll tell you about it. Everything here is priced in US dollars. If you look at a menu, it's either in US dollars or their local currency, but they don't really accept US currency because it's a bit of a pain in the ass. They do for tipping, so if you bring a bunch of $1 bills, that's good. But they prefer Canadian euros or their local currency. And when you come, you'll just have to check out what currency that actually is because it seems to change all the time. It does not make sense to actually convert any of your money into the local currency here. We haven't done it once yet and we haven't needed to. So you'll be fine. Just get a bunch of small bills, Canadian 5s, American 1s, and you'll be fine. And don't give coins. They don't want coins. Coins are a pain in the ass. And if you want to be nice, before you leave, you can offer to buy back a bunch of their coins in exchange for your Canadian. Because as a Canadian, it's not a big deal to bring home coins. So if you want to be friendly and do them a little service, buy up their coins before you get on the plane to go home.
Bolivia has become the third country in South America to begin using the Chinese yuan rather than the American dollar. My guess is that soon, Cuba will adapt Russian or Cuban money, giving the US yet another case of foot and mouth syndrome. But whatever the case, do your own research as to which currency you should bring here, but the bottom line is that if it's money, they'll accept it.
They put in a wooden road there. It looks like brick, but if you look really closely, the bricks are actually made out of a really hard wood. And the reason for that is there used to be soldiers that used to march up and down that road, and it was super noisy, so they changed it to wood, and it's still there. But it's crazy expensive to maintain, so that's the only section in Havana that's a wooden roadway. The rest is all cobblestone, as you can see. Another thing is that Cuba gets 330 sunny days per year, and for it to only be a 3-hour flight from Toronto, that builds a pretty solid case for Canadians to come here. Speaking of Canadians, let me tell you about the demographics here in Cuba. First of all the indigenous Cubans have been wiped out long ago, I think by the Spanish, so there's no actual Cubans. Well, there's Cuban locals, but there's no indigenous Cubans. Other than that, most of the people you're going to find are from Canada, and then there's an assload of Russians. So it's just how it is. There's a lot of Russians. And if you're Taiwanese, don't bother coming here. They do not recognize your passport. We almost didn't get in because of Ollie, but because she's with a Canadian, she speaks Spanish, and she has an expired Nicaraguan passport, they let her in. But if you're Taiwanese, save your money, you won't get in.
The Canadian winter had finally melted in my brain and the Cuban sun had begun to enter my vibe. Without much intention, we found ourselves in a tattoo shop with some of the nicest people we've met on this trip. They even gave us a bottle of rum to take home to Canada. It was time to leave Havana and head to the resort in Varadero. We got in a taxi that our Airbnb host arranged for us the night before. We discovered that they had even called a taxi driver after we got in the taxi to make sure we made it and that we were okay. It turns out that the people in Cuba are invested in us having a good and safe trip, and they'll often call each other to check up on us. It's something we would have never known if Olivia didn't speak Spanish. It was a profound moment of realization, and it's one of the many, many instances that made us fall in love with the Cuban people even further. At this point, I'm angry at the US for their treatment of Cuba, and I utterly despise all the brainless idiots on the internet that leave bad reviews of this beautiful, misrepresented island. Being flooded with both love and hate at the same time turns out to be a wonderful time killer, and before I knew it, we were pulling into Varadero and finding our resort a few minutes later.
Oh, well, we're back at the resort now, finally, and I have settled into a near catatonic state of extreme relaxation, folks. Any complaints anyone has online about Cuba are 9 out of 10 of them are complete bullshit. Those are the people that are just booking all-inclusives, not leaving the resort, and then of course they're having a bad time, because what do you really have to do here? You have the pool and you have the beach, and that's it, and a buffet. Like that sounds like hell. Like, you have to get off. You have to go explore places and meet Cuban people. And if you're just at a resort and you never actually leave, like, you're just surrounded by other Canadians and then a handful of Russians, like, this just can't be a good time. You have to get out there. You have to go check it out. So don't read reviews and don't listen to people online. They're just full of shit and they don't know anything. But you and I know. Okay, the phone plans and Wi-Fi. Right now, at the time of making this video, there's not really any SIM cards available. We just downloaded the offline maps on Google Maps. You'll just have to figure out how to do that on your own if you don't know how. And other than that, we've just been signing on Wi-Fi and it's been fine. You're not going to come here and work remotely, though. Like, you're not going to come here and have meetings. Like, the internet's just not that great. But you know as well as I do that a government is not representative of the people of that country. Like, it's not their fault that you can't get on Wi-Fi. So don't get angry at them. It's the government.
I went on and on like this for a while, deliriously pontificating about all sorts of things that I'll spare you from now. Cuba's the best place you can visit. That's also a cheap and easy place to visit. If you're at all curious about going to Cuba, you have to make it happen. There's almost no barrier to keep you from going, unless you're Taiwanese, then it's impossible. I want the world to feel what I've been feeling since the first time I visited 10 years ago. Cuba is yet another gleaming endorsement for making travel compulsory. There's something to learn everywhere you go, but Cuba especially has the unique ability to pull your head out of your ass and put it in the clouds. Happy travels, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.